Some gimmicks were never going to work, but the worst ones took something that already worked and then totally ruined it. At number 10 on our list, it's when Steve Austin became the Ringmaster. In WCW, Austin had already made waves as Stunning Steve Austin, a sharp-talking heel with great technical skills. Even back then, he had tons of charisma and credibility. He only built on that foundation when he moved to ECW, where he was allowed to let loose and run his mouth. It was here that he basically became the prototype Stone Cold. But when he joined the WWF in 1995, they saddled him with a flat, lifeless gimmick called the Ringmaster. He was handed Ted DiBiase as a manager, and he mostly had to keep his mouth shut. Instead of being a breakout star in the WWF, they turned him into a charisma vacuum. Austin later admitted that he hated the gimmick, but he had bills to pay, so he went along with it. Thankfully, it wasn't long before the WWF saw sense, and Stone Cold was born. At number 9, it's when Goldust went from controversial to completely ridiculous. He was mysterious, unsettling, and he was totally unlike anything else that had ever been seen in the WWF. Dustin Rhodes took what could have been a terrible gimmick in itself and turned it into something career-defining. But by late 1997, they had Goldust burning his bodysuit on TV and rebranding himself as the artist formerly known as Goldust. Managed by Luna Vachon, he started showing up in bondage gear, barking like a dog and doing bad impersonations of the likes of Vader, Chyna, and even his own dad Dusty. The WWF wanted to evolve the Goldust character to keep up with the chaos of the Attitude Era, but this was just total nonsense. Soon after, he quit the company altogether and went to WCW, where he became Seven, which might have been even worse. At number 8, it's when TNA told AJ Styles to pretend he was Ric Flair. Styles had been the face of the company, one of TNA's few homegrown superstars who'd carried the company on his back since day one. TNA fans connected with him not just because of his matches, but because he felt authentic. He wasn't a WWE cast-off, he was their guy. In 2010, that identity got thrown out of the window at the request of Eric Bischoff. Bischoff thought that AJ lacked personality and needed a gimmick, but instead of coming up with something brand new, he aligned him with Ric Flair. But Rick wasn't just his manager. Suddenly, AJ was strutting around the ring and wooing, cutting awkward promos and wearing Flair's robes like a bad cosplay artist. AJ was never going to be Ric Flair. He had his own style and his own connection with the fans. This was one of many dumb decisions that TNA made towards AJ that eventually led him to quit the company for good. At number 7 on our list, it's that time that D-Von Dudley lost the tables and found God. D-Von had been one half of the most decorated tag teams of the Attitude Era. With Bubba Ray, he smashed through tables, won championships, and brought hardcore tag team wrestling into the mainstream. The fans loved the chaos, but after the 2002 brand split, WWE decided it was time to split the Dudleys up too. D-Von was moved to SmackDown and rebranded as Reverend D-Von, a dodgy church leader who gave morality lessons while carrying around a donation box. But in the end, the best thing about the gimmick was Deacon Batista. Yes, this was Batista's big break on the main roster, and he did a fantastic job menacingly standing next to D-Von. The crowd never got behind this gimmick, and it was basically dead on arrival. Within a few months, WWE quietly ended the experiment, and the Dudley Boys were back to putting people through tables. At number 6 is when Booker T got downgraded to being G.I. Bro. By the year 2000, it was clear that Booker T had everything needed to be a top guy in WCW. He'd broken away from Harlem Heat and he was connecting with the fans as a singles wrestler. But instead of pushing him as a serious main eventer, WCW brought back G.I. Bro, an old military gimmick that he'd used back in 1990. Head writer Vince Russo didn't think that Booker had enough character, so he gave him one, but nobody took it seriously. Fans knew that he deserved more than this, and eventually WCW realised it too, and he finally got that singles push that he should have had all along. At number 5, it's Shorty G, the lowest point of Chad Gable's career in every sense of the word. Chad Gable was a legitimately great athlete, a standout tag team wrestler, and one of the best pure technicians on the WWE roster. He'd earned respect through his work in American Alpha and showed flashes of real charisma, but in 2019, WWE turned him into Shorty G. This new gimmick revolved entirely around the fact that he wasn't tall. Apart from the name change, he got a cheesy new outfit and a cringeworthy new promo style. Vince McMahon reportedly saw the gimmick as a way to embrace Gable's underdog status, although it's more likely that he just thought it was absolutely hilarious to make fun of him. In the end, he was allowed to drop the gimmick and he slowly worked his way back to being taken seriously again. In at number 4 is a lesson in how to ruin a good wrestler with a terrible gimmick. Shane Douglas made his name in ECW as the franchise, an intense, foul-mouthed heel. He could talk and he could wrestle, and he carried himself like a real main eventer in the company. But when he signed with the WWF in 1995, they gave him a completely different identity. Now he was an arrogant school teacher, delivering smug lectures on a chalkboard and grading other wrestlers' performances. The gimmick was loosely inspired by his real-life academic background, and it was meant to draw heat because he was so smug and snivelling, but the fans just weren't turning up to his classes. And backstage, things were even worse. He got on the bad side of the clique, who allegedly made his life miserable, and then he fell out with Vince McMahon. In the end, he got a negative grade from the boss, and Douglas left the WWF after just 6 months. Number 3 on our list is One Man Gang's identity crisis. One Man Gang was a legitimately intimidating force in the late 80s. He was a massive brawling biker, standing nearly 7 foot tall and weighing over 400 pounds. Then the WWF decided to transform him into Akeem, the African Dream. They showed surreal videos of his manager Slick taking him to the deepest, darkest parts of Africa for a bizarre kind of rebirth, complete with jive talk, outrageous dancing, and a bright blue dashiki. This was apparently a jab at Dusty Rhodes, who also enjoyed a little jive talk here and there. So this massive scary monster was now dancing around the ring like a lunatic, but it wasn't really that funny, and it certainly wasn't intimidating. It was a sad end to One Man Gang's run in the WWF. At number 2, it's when Tony Atlas was repackaged as a walking stereotype. Tony Atlas was one of the most physically impressive wrestlers of the early 80s, and he was one of the most respected black athletes of the era. He was nicknamed Mr. USA, and he had real star power and made history as one half of the first African-American WWF Tag Team Champions alongside Rocky Johnson. But in 1990, after years away from the spotlight, he returned to the company as Saba Simba. It was a stereotypical African warrior gimmick, complete with tribal gear, a spear, and a name that sounded like a Disney knockoff. The fans just didn't take this seriously, and the whole presentation was frankly embarrassing. Within months, the character disappeared from TV, and Tony Atlas's run quietly came to an end. And at number 1 in our countdown of gimmick downgrades, it's when Terry Taylor went clucking mad. Before he became the Red Rooster, Taylor had a solid career. He'd built a strong reputation in the NWA, and some were even touting him as a future main eventer. So when he arrived in the WWF, people thought that Vince McMahon might turn him into something big. But instead, he was turned into the Red Rooster. He made clucking noises during matches and promos, and he'd strut around the ring like an absolute maniac. He didn't evolve into a superstar, he devolved into a bird. It's been reported since that this cocky gimmick was actually a punishment he was given from management due to his attitude backstage. And what a punishment it was, because he looked visibly embarrassed every time he was on screen, and really, it's all he's been remembered for ever since. If 10 bad gimmick changes weren't enough for you, I've got plenty more lists where this came from. Check out the playlist that's on the screen right now. You might even find something worse than the Red Rooster.